Matt, I hate to tell you this, man, but
here we go.
If our listeners, you can see Matt, he kind of looks like Forrest Gump at the end of his run across America. I just want to appreciate that picture.
When I started working here, I had a shaved head and clean shaved every day, and
we converted.
Wine world is totally different from the whiskey world, so I'm embracing it.
You definitely look like you work at a whiskey distillery now.
Welcome to another trip down the Bourbon Road with your hosts, Jim and Mike. So grab a glass of your favorite bourbon and kick back.
We would like to thank Tommy and Gwen Mitchell from Logheads Home Center for supporting this episode of the Bourbon Road. Find out more about their fine rustic furniture at logheadshomecenter.com.
Hey, this is Big Chief, and you're listening to the Bourbon Road. And I'm out at Leiper's Fork Distillery in Leipers Fork, Tennessee. And I got Lee Kennedy, the founder and owner, April Weller Cantrell, and Matt King with me today. How you guys doing?
Doing well, Mike. Thanks for being here.
We're good. Glad you're here.
Doing great. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. So I'm out here at this just an awesome distillery. We're driving out here today, and it kind of reminded me the hills of Kentucky, down here in Tennessee. Yeah. And we're driving along on the back little narrow roads and stuff, and little creeks and farms. And she's like, take some photos. And then we drive up to the distillery. You got an old pickup that's sitting out there.
Yeah, 1929. And then
I drive up to a dog run cabin or a dog trot cabin that you guys have in your tasting room.
Absolutely.
That's what traditionally what a distiller would have lived back in the 1800s, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We were trying to harken back to the traditions of whiskey making in Tennessee, and going back there are a lot of similarities going back to their settlement between Kentucky and Tennessee. We used to have a very vibrant distilling industry here that got carried on by George and Jack. I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, this old cabin was originally built in 1820. And a lot of the early distilleries that were farm distilleries that turned into bigger distilleries in Tennessee, and I'm sure it's the same way in Kentucky as well, that, you would have a farm distillery going on that started in a residence with a little distillery in the back, usually centered around a spring or something like that. So as we were getting into what we wanted to do here and trying to represent those traditions, this old cabin we found down the road and moved log by log. It's a neat story, and it's a neat building. Yeah.
Well, I told my wife when we're driving up, I said, Viv, if we get up there and there's a coon dog on the porch and some barefooted kids and some pregnant woman walks out with a shotgun, we got to go. I was like, but I think we're at the right place.
30 years ago here, you might have seen that.
I'm sure if you just keep driving, you might still see that, right?
That's true. Yeah.
But this area has been known for whiskey for a long time, right?
Sure. Since its early foundings, I'm a big history guy, and April is too. And so we'd like to study old pre-prohibition distilling history. In 1850, Williamson County actually had 10 distilleries in it, according to its industrial census. And initially, it was these farm distillers and things like that. But our county historian told us at some point, every spring on this side of Williamson County had a still on it at one point, especially during the Prohibition area and things like that.
And that's because the farmers didn't want their grain to go to waste. And what better way you can only make so much bread, right? And eat it. Well, you got to have something to drink that bread with, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah,
I didn't see a lot of grapes growing around here, so
we can't grow a mature wine grape, but we can make some whiskey.
Well, that's a good thing, I think. And the old boy that used to own this place, Colonel Hunter, he made some whiskey too, right?
Yeah, he did. He was actually the second owner of this property before the Native Americans. Actually, they had it before all of us. But he was the second owner, and he moved to Tennessee like most of our early settlers did from North Carolina. Back in those days, Tennessee was an extension of North Carolina, the same way Kentucky was an extension of Virginia. So he moved here and settled on about actually went down to War of 1812, went to New Orleans with Andrew Jackson, fought the British, moved back to this area and purchased about 1,000 acres in down this old South Hall Road. And so he had a distillery over on Old 96 around the corners called the Distillery Tract. So, you know, he's a true Tennessee volunteer, and kind of, we would like to honor him through one of our brands here. And I'm wondering if
I'd be interested. I'm gonna have to take a look back and see what those soldiers, Tennessee volunteers that went down and fought in the War of 1812, if they were granted any land, and maybe because 1,000 acres back then, really to settlers really wasn't that much. But a lot of times the government would grant them lands for fighting. That'd be some history I'd like to try to dig up about Colonel Hunter.
Absolutely.
That's pretty cool.
You know, and April has some, you know, a lot of our Revolutionary War soldiers were granted property in Tennessee and Kentucky.
Yeah, they, in fact, this with the second owner of this, he owned it until Hunter bought it because he wasn't a very good farmer, so he must have not been making whiskey or something.
So what's the first expression you got for me today?
So, you know, as a new distillery, we don't make vodka or gin here. We're a traditional whiskey house. You know, that's what our forefathers made here in Tennessee. So we went and selected a good 10-year-old Tennessee bourbon and brought back a pre-prohibition label, which is Colonel Hunter here. And so we named it Colonel Hunter Select Barrel. So this is a 10-year-old Tennessee bourbon. The grain bill on it is 84% corn, 8% rye, and 8% malted barley. It's a typical soft corn bourbon. Like I said, it's 10 years old, but it's really nice. It's a very approachable, drinkable bourbon. So this has been helping us pay the bills for the last 3.5 years. You know, we just released some of our rye whiskey back in November.
Well, you got to pay for that beautiful distillery, right? Probably to me, you know, you took me through a tour of the distillery out there, and let me put a bung in a barrel. Probably one of the most beautiful distilleries I've ever been to.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
You know, that just that barn style, I think, is, like I said before, you're not going to get no more traditional than this unless, you know, somebody's back in them woods.
Sure.
Back there making some whiskey.
Try to keep it very traditional. So yeah, this is our, the first product we had here beside our white whiskeys, which we tell a different story with those. So, you know, as far as the tasting notes on it, I'm going to let Matt kind of walk you through some of those. And
yeah, so that first one there on your left, Big Chief, we know you like your heavy pour there, so we got you a flight today. But like he said, there's a very approachable whiskey, but it's got some complexity too. There's caramels and vanillas and butterscotch, brown sugar, you know, there's a little Grand Marsala. But this is what a typical, you know, we wanted approachable bourbon for people to try for one of the first things we're producing, but to put on the shelves.
Man, I'm getting a little bit of toasted marshmallow on that. From a campfire, like we're down at the creek, just having some marshmallows.
And Mike, that's at 90 proof.
This is 90 proof.
90 proof.
And that's it's really a marriage, and go ahead and try it. But it's really a marriage of 30 barrels. So we go into a barrel house in Tennessee, and they let us select, go through that house and select barrels out of it. So it's a true small batch.
It's got a little bit of pepper on the back end, just like I think I would expect. A great expression. It's got some, I think John from Dad's Drinking Bourbon last year said it's got some beautiful legs on it. And watch it run.
Yeah. We won some awards on this whiskey out at the ADI conference 2 years in a row. It got best of class last year, so it's been good for us.
So you had to keep the lights on somehow. You had to pay for everything, and that's what you put out, and you kept your heritage and stuff. I think that's a pretty traditional looking whiskey bottle too.
Yeah, and our standard label will be close to that.
Okay. Yeah, I love the expression.
Yeah, isn't that nice?
Now, who went and did the barrel picks?
So initially, we mentioned a man named Dave Shurick. Our first barrel pick was me and April and Dave Shurick. I did that.
He's up at owns Boondocks now.
That's right. Yep. Yes, and he actually brought back a Tennessee whiskey a few years ago. Actually, I think it's more like 5 or 6, called Jailers. Did really well, and they kind of outkicked their coverage on it, but it was a really well done whiskey. So initially with that, so he kind of taught us the ropes, and since then it's just been our group. Yeah.
Well, you definitely picked a guy that really knows what he's doing, right?
Yes, it was
long time with Brown Forman, help build Woodford Reserve and bring that brand back. And I mean, if that's who you helped, who else in the whiskey industry is really as a young distillery has helped you out?
So, we're down here in Tennessee, but we rely on Kentucky for a lot of resources. After Prohibition, Tennessee, kind of because of various reasons, didn't open their state back up. Kentucky obviously did. So, we tell folks the places I've been in the world, Scotland and Kentucky, the general population knows about making whiskey. Everybody has a brother or a dad or an aunt or a mom that worked in the distillery. So Pat and Shane up at Wilderness Trail helped us out a lot. Firm Solutions. That's how we met Mr. Shurik. So we rely on a lot of folks. So Pat and Shane, they're we call them our science consultants. Those guys are the whiskey wizards.
They're definitely that. They got a good deal, and you pick the right guys to work with. And
sure.
I think there's several people that you could have went with, but two most genuine fellows you'll ever meet. Kentucky gentlemen, if
yes, for sure. They're great guys and making a great whiskey.
Now, from what I hear, they were hellraisers in college, though. They're just two good guys, though.
For sure.
So let's go back a little bit and talk about how did Lee Kennedy say, I want to make a little bit of whiskey?
We were talking about a little bit about this earlier. What initially drew me to whiskey and the production of it was from a cultural heritage standpoint. I'm a Scotch-Irish guy. And there's a direct link to the southeastern United States and bourbon production all the way back to Scotland and Ireland. So when I was about 16 years old, I had a copy of the Foxfire book and an uncle who drew a still on a napkin. And so in my mom's basement, when I was about 16, I had a 5-gallon pressure cooker and copper condensing line running through a 5-gallon bucket was my condenser, and got some old archaic recipes out of the Foxfire book. And, their internet was not, I'm old. I hope I'm not that old. But
I didn't have no internet when I was growing up.
There was no internet. So
I had to drive like 110 miles in Texas to a place called Pretty, Texas to get booze. So
yeah, it's so
I wish I'd had that idea to make me some my homemade still.
We didn't make anybody blind, and I learned just enough to kind of be dangerous. So fast forward to graduating college, moved back to Tennessee, bought a 30-gallon still, and the statute of limitations, I think, have run out now, but I was barn distiller for quite a long time. And, there's only one way to learn it, and that's kind of do it. And by then, internet had come along. So from about 2002 to the inception, or really 2009, I was doing some experimenting and poured everything I had into learning the craft, and just really fell in love with it from a science standpoint at that time. It's always boggled my mind since I was a teenager that, you could take 3 inert ingredients and a contraption and turn something in. It's a flammable consumable.
You really don't need a whole lot, right? The farmers back then, you need some oak, you need some grains, and you need some good water.
I mean, really, it boiled down to its essence. I think Pat and Shane would back me up on this. Water, sugar, and yeast in a still. That's what you need to make alcohol. Of course, that's simplified with the sugar. I mean, there's more to it than that. So it's kind of, that's always boggled my mind that people figured this out 500 years ago, going back to Scotland and Ireland. And here we are sitting here today, with the technology's different, but the science is the same,
Then he picked up Matt. He's like a shaggy dog over there.
He's like my adopted son. So
where'd you pick Matt up at?
In order, actually, when I was going through, and we talked a little bit about history, Tennessee had 322 distilleries in the state in 1895, and our centennial was in 1896. So ahead of that centennial, they did an industrial census, and I actually have it in the office over there. We had 322 distilleries, and so when I was going through that, then that went to 2 after Prohibition ended. So we had a law actually against distillation in our county. Our state legislature changed the law in 2009 to allow distilleries back in the state. So really you had a manufacturer's prohibition almost for 100 years. And we actually had prohibition in 1910 in Tennessee instead of 1920 when it was federally adopted. So I went through a really arduous process of convincing our our local officials to let me do what I wanted to do. So part of that process, I had 30 acres out here in Leiper's Fork for a long time, knew my neighbors, sat on their couches. And so went to some of the community leaders here and ended up sitting down with April and sharing with her my vision and what I wanted to do. And so from day one, with my family and her, we kind of fought the good fight and went through 4 public hearings, and took us 3.5 years to get local approval.
Was you really just hitting on her? Or?
Oh, hell no. Sorry. Oh, hell no.
Now, April, you got some lineage with that name Willer, right?
I do, and I think that probably makes the funny story between me and Lee, because I was working up in Leiper's Fork and I was doing all the tourism for Leiper's Fork up there, and when Lee came in, I loved what he was telling me, but I was a little haughty about my Kentucky upbringing, and he said he wanted to make bourbon, and I looked at him and said, You cannot do that. And then might I add that he looked so much differently back then. Like, his hair was so short. He had no beard. He come in with khakis and a button down on, and he hands me this business plan to go home and look at, and I looked at it and I called him back and I said, I'm so sorry. I was so wrong to have been so haughty. I said, clearly you can make bourbon in all the states.
Are you the one that forced him to look like Billy Ray Cyrus?
Well, no. I think that was something that Lee wanted to do. But I will say I did probably encourage it, because my husband had hair up until about 6 months ago that was past his waist almost. So.
I'm just messing with Lee.
Hey, I'll take Billy Ray.
Yeah.
So what's the second expression we got?
So the second two, really, the story of the second two, or the second and the third, kind of go hand in hand. So, being a barn distiller, I was making Tennessee whiskey and bourbon in my barn. So, I had some preconceived notions of what I wanted to do, what kind of style, what my grain bills would be, that kind of thing. So, I expressly, and we can get into some of this if you want to, but I decided to make a rye whiskey. The first thing we ever distilled here were 30 barrels of rye whiskey. And we really did that. Well, I love the history and the tradition behind rye, but from another standpoint is I knew I was going to release a rye whiskey in year 3 before 4 years old. And a lot of that was business plan kind of stuff. And then also the market, consumers a little more forgiving on a young rye whiskey. There's a lot of younger ryes on the market.
And rye right now is a up and coming thing in America.
Yeah. I mean, it's the grand old grain. It's the first whiskey we distilled in the United States.
I wouldn't agree with that. I'd say wheat, but that's just me.
So
I agree with you.
I didn't know what I wanted to do as far as the recipes, my grain bill. So we went through an experimental phase of 7 different rye recipes before we decided on one. So as a result, that kind of resulted in 13 snowflake barrels. Matt makes fun of me for saying that, but they're all different recipes. So
Matt doesn't look like a snowflake.
He's definitely not a snowflake. Yeah. We call him Jon Snow from Florida.
Beating up on me over here.
I think you're a little bit bigger than Jon Snow.
But so that first one you're trying is a barrel 9. So it's actually 55% rye, 30% corn, 15 malted barley. And the proof on it is 104.6. And it's a single barrel cask strength. And I tell people, and they also make fun of me saying this too, but to me, single barrel cask strengths are kind of scary, especially with a young whiskey. It's like standing up in front of people naked with no makeup on. We literally dump that whiskey out of the barrel, run it through a filter and bottle it. And we don't chill filter here. So, with when you're marrying whiskey, you can select barrels with certain profiles, and by using proofing water, you can shape that whiskey more so into what you want to do. So these single barrel cask strengths, they are what they are. So the first one is the 55% corn, and then the barrel number 5, which is the third, that one is 85% rye. So that was the highest rye grain bill we did, and it's actually only in 15% malted barley. We use 15% barley malt everything we do here. And Matt can kind of walk you through some of the profiles.
Let's taste this.
Yeah, let's try that. And I think one of the things that I've had this conversation with Lee and April several times is in our industry, we use the word age and maturity kind of interchangeably, and really they're two totally different definitions. I mean, we know that rye, at least here, we believe, matures a little bit quicker than corn. It doesn't necessarily age any faster. And it goes back to these, do we use a smaller barrel or do we use a 53-gallon barrel? And so I think that was one of the things that coming from the wine world over to the whiskey world, with Lee here and walking me through that, it really changed my perspective on what we were doing with our rye whiskey and why we selected the 7 different recipes that we did, more experimental, but also why we went with the 55 rye, 30 corn, 15 barley. So, he says being in the South, we all gravitate towards a sweeter palate.
Sure.
And so that's why we wanted to have that higher
Kind of
corn
like that
note.
sweet tea.
That's right. Exactly.
I tasted this and it almost has that super sweet taste to it.
And actually,
Yeah.
we went with for our standard rye grain bill. So after barrel 13, everything had 55% rye in it. We went with that lower content of rye. We call it a Southern style rye. I've heard you in the past talk about this. We use actually a farmer out of Kentucky. He farms 3,000 acres in Williamson County for us. So the corn's grown on our property up the road. But we don't grow rye that well down here. They're starting to develop some Southern strains of rye, and we're looking into that as well. But so it's always kind of piqued my interest of, and I guess things were different back in the day, but how did rye become the dominant small grain in bourbon? Because we don't grow it that well down here, need the short, cool summers. So because of things like that, we went with the lower rye content of 55% for our standard grain bill going forward.
That could have been because of history, and there's those, I don't know if antique or what would you call them, grains that were grown back in the 1800s, and that's what farmers had was rye.
Right.
And then that art in the 30s and the Great Depression, the president came out, and the Tennessee Valley, especially in Kentucky, the government come in and kind of told farmers, hey, we're going to have to change how you farm, and kind of retaught them how to plant because they were eroding away. They would farm up a hill instead of sideways on a hill, and said, hey, here's the grains that we're going to do to replant the soil, and maybe rye was harsh on the soil, I think. I could be a little bit wrong with that, but I'm pretty positive I'm right. So in the 30s and 40s, when they dammed all the rivers around here and stuff, they teaching these farmers about erosion, took away those ancient grains like rye away from Kentucky. It's not that they can't be grown here, and this kind of people forget about it and they buy their rye somewhere else.
That's very interesting you say that. Florida State's actually doing a project right now with what they're calling black wheat. So we used to grow a strain that's the ancient grain of wheat in the South that was grown. So, and we get our malt out of Riverbend Malt House out of Asheville, North Carolina. The malt's grown up in Kentucky by Walnut Grove. I think some of the guys up in Kentucky use Walnut Grove as well. Holcomb family's awesome up there. But anyway, so I think they're kind of spearheading some of the Southern strains of rye coming out. And there's actually a local rye producer here about 20 miles from us in Grinder Switch who's growing local rye. So we use as local as we can. Our corn and our wheat's coming out of Williamson County. Corn's off my farm. Our rye's out of Southern Kentucky, and our barley's out of Kentucky, but we send it to North Carolina to malt.
Now, I got this thought in my mind. I've been having this for a while, and I've been wanting to ask a distillery about this. Now, Indiana's really big into making popcorn. They grow popcorn. A lot of states do in the Midwest. And I kind of wondered if anybody could make whiskey out of that.
I mean, as long as it's got starch in it, you can make whiskey out of it. Oh, well, if it's a grain that has starch.
I just thought it'd be cool to do it. And
you may be onto something.
Hey, kettle corn in a glass. Come on.
True popcorn whiskey right there. I thought that for a while. And I was like, man, next time I go to the distillery, I'm going to ask them that and see what they think about that. Cause I guess that's really an ancient grain too, as popcorn is.
I think after being around Pat and Shane, you find out that you can make whiskey out of almost any grain because they simplify the most intense science that you could possibly.
There's quinoa whiskeys on the market somewhere.
Well,
rice has been absolutely for whiskey forever, and actually in America, rice whiskey is going to be coming back. There's a place called 7-3 Distillery down in New Orleans, and they're going to be making some rice whiskey, and I thought that was pretty neat. So a question for you, April and Matt. He done told me he couldn't find no juice to drink as a kid, so he's like, I just make my own in a barn. That's you're pretty thirsty. April, what was your first drink of bourbon? You remember? Oh man, it's bad girl.
Well, I mean, I grew up. My family's from originally Nelson County, so I mean that kind of I think that they put it in your bottle just to like keep you to shut up. So, which isn't a bad thing, I guess.
Which they call a toothache, right?
Right, exactly. It was a toothache. It's all medicinal. Weller was my first bourbon that I drank. And it was, it's funny because it was always the bourbon that I loved the most. And I always complain because I say I've probably boasted about it too much and now everybody likes it. But I mean, that's what gave me my start. But I found out that I like a lot of bourbons. And Lee, honestly, is the one who taught me to like rye. And when he first met me, I was completely against rye. I was like, I do not like rye. I know I don't like rye. And he was like, I don't know about that. So he has taught me a whole lot about some of the industry and obviously, but some of even on my flavor profiles. And I will say this, I find that the women that come in here really, really like these ryes because I find that women like a more robust flavor. And even though these are on the sweeter side, there's, that peppery flavor and they really like that. And that's what I like about it.
Women have a better palate than men do. Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree with you on that. But I mean, just in general, being a part of Bourbon Women, just knowing all those and meeting all those different women, I've found that so many of them tend to lean toward a rye or a high rye, bourbon. And I get it now. It's a really robust flavor. I like it.
Now, so let's fast forward to today.
Okay.
Besides Leiper's Fork whiskey and bourbon, what's your go-to bourbon on the shelf?
Go-to bourbon on my shelf would be 3. Maybe 4, but Weller would be 1, and that's always there.
Amen, sister.
Yep. 4 Roses, and that's being small batch. I really like their small batch. I like the single barrel too, but the small batch is a really good one. Old Forester, really like Old Forester because I like some of the flavor profiles that it leaves on your palate. And then my last one's probably going to surprise people is I really am digging Old Granddad.
Old Granddad.
on the proof and the 100 proof and bottled in bond. I really like it. It's to me, it's a very sneaky whiskey. People that would pass it on the shelf because it's not the high priced whiskey.
So you just told everybody you're a penny pitcher.
Am I a penny pincher if I drink Weller? I don't think so.
It's hard to do that
find
now.
It for $22 a bottle.
That's right.
That's what I tried. Matt, what about you, man? When was your first?
One of the things I remember growing up, and like I mentioned earlier, grew up kind of around wine a lot. My parents were winos. I tell you, they were. My dad's putting in a wine cellar in his house right now. So, but one of the things that I would always remember is they would hand me a glass of something, and they would say, "Okay, is this red or white?" And obviously that was an easy question growing up. And then, okay, smell this. You've smelled something like this before, okay. Now it eventually grew into taste this, you've had something that tastes like this before. What is it? And so I think that helped to build my palate, but I think my brother wrecked it when we went to Michigan State and he started pulling out, whatever bottom shelf whiskey he could buy. But I think growing up, I do remember sitting down one time with my father and he pulled out a bottle of Gentleman Jack Daniels and set it down. He said, if you want to have a drink with me, you're more welcome to stay at the house tonight and have a drink, but you're not going out. And I think that was one of the best memories I had because it was one of the best conversations growing up, with my parents. It was teaching me to appreciate what was in my glass. But, Michigan State kind of wrecked that for me too.
Well, that's I think that's being raised responsibly. Hey, let's try it here home. And that's probably a lot of people's first whiskey. I think that might have been one of my really first whiskeys. Is my stepdad had a bottle of Jack Daniels and we drank that. And then I went out one night with a bunch of buddies in high school and I came home about 4 a.m. and about 4:30, my bed got kicked and said, get up. And I had to go scoop out a corn, a silo that had the top blown off and it rained and filled it up about 4 foot deep. And I had to scoop that out. And in the hot Texas sun in the summertime,
probably some fermentation going on.
Won't forget that, huh?
It almost ruined me. And then, it took me a while to really appreciate the whiskey. And then I kind of moved to 10 High was a whiskey for a while, but I drank it in military special being in the military. And I just kind of graduated from there. Now, what do you, besides Leiper's Fork, obviously, I'm sure you do get to drink a lot of that. What do you?
Yeah. I think that, as Lee says too, we can really find something to appreciate in every whiskey here. I love Old Forester single barrel. Big fan of that right now. Just finished a bottle of Buffalo Trace that I really enjoyed. Had a buddy give me a blind sample of very old Barton 100 proof that blew me away not too long ago. Surprisingly, I had no idea what was in the glass. And when he told me, I was like, man, this is, I can appreciate this. So, but I think Old Forester, Buffalo Trace are kind of my two go-tos on a daily, but other than ours, obviously. But
well, I'll tell you what, I've been sipping on this as we've been talking this rye whiskey, and I'm not a rye whiskey guy, but I always think I'll be a wheated whiskey guy, but ryes have grown on me in the past 6-7 months as the more I drink and the more places we visit and the great expressions of stuff. This has such a caramely, still go back to that sweet tea, almost where you could put a spoon in it and stir it.
Sure.
And the spoon to stand up. Well, let's keep sipping on this, and we'll take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll try the other two expressions you got for us.
Absolutely.
you got it.
I'd like to thank Tommy and Gwen Mitchell from Logheads Home Center for supporting this episode of the Bourbon Road. Logheads Home Center, nestled in the hills of Kentucky, is an industry leader in building handcrafted rustic furniture. Family owned and operated, they take pride in offering only the very best for their customers. The Logheads, and that's what they like to call themselves, are skilled woodcrafters who are passionate about creating rustic furniture for people who appreciate the beauty of natural wood. Owners Tommy and Gwen don't just sell the rustic lifestyle, they live it. And you can be sure that Logheads furniture will always be handcrafted in Kentucky by artisans who embrace the simple way of life. Logheads rustic furniture is made from northern white cedar, a sustainable wood that's naturally rot and termite resistant. Its beauty and quality will add warmth to your earthy lifestyle for generations to come. Be sure to check out everything they have to offer at logheadshomecenter.com. And while you're at it, give Tommy and Gwen a shout on Facebook or Instagram at Logheads Home Center.
So we're back here still at Leiper's Fork. So Lee, what's third expression you got for us to sample?
So the third is another rye whiskey. So going back to that story, we had 7 different of those initial rye grain bills that were experimental, and they range from 55% rye up to 85. So you're seeing both ends of the spectrum here. So the first one you tried was that 55%, more that Southern style rye, with that 30% corn. This third one is just 2 grains. It's 85% rye. And 15% malted barley. So it's typical of a high rye, more of a northeastern style of rye. So we want to kind of show you both ends of those spectrums. And to me, it's really interesting because you can really see what that grain contributes. And I gravitate towards the lower rye content, hence the reason we carried on from barrel 13 onward with the 55% rye. And that one, the proof on that is 106.8.
That says Jingle Barrel. Was it made at Christmas time?
That was, so all of those labels are handwritten, and it's supposed to say single barrel.
That actually is an S from one of the people who wrote that.
I see.
We had a table of about 5 ladies for 2 weeks handwriting labels, and they were hand applied. So it was in that, during Christmas time, we released a 7 series box set that you see on the table here. So each bottle represents one of the 7 different grain bills. That's
a grown man's Christmas present.
Yeah,
right?
we kind of,
That's for definitely a grown man.
Cool.
I gotta say, I'm sitting here and I usually can pick out like I said, hey, Billy Ray Cyrus and stuff. Matt, I hate to tell you this, man, but
here we go.
If our listeners, you can see Matt, he kind of looks like Forrest Gump at the end of his run across America. I just want to give you that picture.
When I started working here, I had a shaved head and clean shaved every day, and
we converted.
Wine world is totally different from the whiskey world, so I'm embracing it.
You definitely look like you work at a whiskey distillery now.
Well, I'll appreciate that. I don't know about the Forrest Gump, but I'll appreciate that.
We're going to carry that one a long way. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Thanks, Mike.
You get a muddy T-shirt, man, you're all good.
I know my Halloween costume this year.
Well, if you end up in life with as much money as Tom Hanks has, that'd be a compliment. Right there.
There you go.
Right.
No
There you
doubt. No doubt.
This is some great rye. You know, this is super high rye. It's got a definitely a kick to it.
Yeah, it does. You know, it's and y'all,
but
April
not
and
as
Mac-
peppery, I don't think, as you might think it would be. To me, on the front end with the nose and even the flavor, it has a peppery, but it tastes like a green apple to me. I have a lot of green apple on it. That
I get that on the nose as well.
That I get it on the nose, and even when I first get it, it hits the tongue. But yeah, it's a surprising. All of these to me are $7 set, as well as the other ryes that we bottled. None of them to me drink as high as the proofs seem.
I'm gonna tell you what I think the taste of this is. If I took some Twizzlers and set them on my dash in a hot summer sun and I ate one of them, that's what I'd think of, like a cherry Twizzler.
It's funny you say that. Matt has used that tasting note as well, and really for us, you know, the way our still's set up as well. Our exit proof off the still is about 137. So I think, and we use a different style of malted barley. We're actually using a 6-row brewer's malt that's toasted before we get it. So, you know, even on our ryes, we have a naturally sweeter profile, and that's just because, you know, like my palate gravitates towards sweet. So obviously you're going to make the kind of whiskey you want to drink. So everything we kind of, you know, everything you do in a distillery has a reason, but everything is kind of sets up towards a sweeter style profile.
That's kind of how I think. You know, I think me and Jim both have different opinions on stuff, and that's good for our podcast. And I saw you had some water on the table for us to put in there, but I'm kind of like John from Dad's Drinking Bourbon. I'd listen to his episode with you guys, and
John's great.
He had said that he believes that you should drink whiskey the way that the distiller put it in a bottle. And I'm kind of that same way. I like to drink it neat, no water, no ice, no nothing. I want to me, that's that purity. That's that baker's. Whenever you have a cake from somebody, you don't say, well, you know what I do? I get me some sprinkles and put on that cake from that baker.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, I have that philosophy too. You know, it's especially my initial approach to the whiskey. You know, I'm always going to try it neat. Even some of the, you know, crazy cask strengths that are up there, you know, over 125, what they went in the barrel at. You know, I'm at least going to try it neat. But to me, my favorite proof points tend to be between 95 and nothing really over 110. You know, after that, you know, but I'll drink a neat whiskey up to about 110.
Well, I think a neat whiskey, you're drinking over 110. You're drinking a batch proof or a, you know, barrel cask strength, whatever you want to call it, full proof. When you're drinking that, you can only drink so many of those.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You're not going to be able to walk straight.
Right. Small sips.
But Irish whiskey or the Scotch, what's the proof on those usually?
80 on Irish and Scotch. You know, traditionally that's what it's been. And we actually make an Irish style whiskey here. We can't call it an Irish whiskey. We, you know, a traditional Jameson grain bill, 40% malted barley, 60% unmalted. 1 month a year we play around here and we do alternative grain bills. And I like Matt was saying earlier, I appreciate all kinds of whiskeys, Irish whiskey, Scotch whiskey. I mean, some of the Lafroigs are hard to choke down, but pretty much in general, I can find something to appreciate in any whiskey, kind of like a person. I try to find something to appreciate.
Could you imagine a bunch of leprechauns running around drinking 138 proof whiskey?
So that, you know, back to that Irish is 80 proof and it's triple distilled. So, you know, it's a lighter whiskey to begin with. So we take 40% malted wheat from our county, 60% unmalted, and we triple distill it in the Irish tradition. And it comes off very characteristic of an Irish whiskey. So we've got it sitting in barrels and used in ex-bourbon barrels right now. It's nice. Need some time.
So do you like that Irish whiskey, April?
I do.
I mean, that's kind of what
it's just
bourbon
a different
came from, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I guess. I mean,
the
processes, but I mean, I do like the wheated. I'm kind of like both of them. I can find something to like, and I wish I could find something I didn't like.
I mean, I got this theory about wheated whiskey and Weller, and for people that don't know, Weller is the father of wheated whiskey. If you drink any other wheated whiskey, he's the first man that we know put wheat in it. But I think the man got sold a bunch of wheat, and he had an extra, and he's like, I got to get rid of this.
Well, I will neither confirm nor deny that I know anything about that.
It's funny how there's probably a lot of that goes on in history that nobody knows about, just little bitty circumstances that turn into myths and legends and, that kind of thing.
Yeah, there is a lot of lore. People say facts, but, Elijah Craig being the father of bourbon, and that's pretty disproven today.
Sure.
That he's more than likely not the father of bourbon.
Right.
But I love new craft distilleries like you guys. You're building your own history. There's no story behind you. You're building your own story. Now you got Colonel Hunter here, and you're using his legacy, but there's no backstory. It's you.
Yeah.
The Lee that got in his barn and was making some hooch. That's the start of Leiper's Fork, right?
And kind of my opinion on that is all of our backstories, anybody that's making Tennessee whiskey or bourbon, that tradition of those whiskeys is our backstory.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't make vodka and gin here. I appreciate those products, but I love the cultural heritage of our state, same way in Kentucky, that, and that going back to that history, it's so convoluted. It was more of a cultural movement. Like those guys from Scotland and Ireland came over here. They didn't have barley at their disposal, but they could grow the hell out of Native American corn. And they realized that was
the grain they had available,
absolutely.
Right?
So, you distilled what you had at your fingertips. And, that was the birth of bourbon. You can't, to tie it to one single person is
a lot of the bourbon
crazy.
industry, a lot of people don't know that is German, that German heritage too.
Sure.
The Germans were making whiskey. And if you told Germans that today, they'd be like, no way.
Yeah.
We had, my wife's family's from Germany, and they came over here this summer, and they don't like whiskey at all.
I know. Is that not bizarre?
They like that beer though. And they like Budweiser. And I used to be a big beer drinker, but I think I gravitated towards bourbon because I'm a big guy. If I drink, it takes a lot of beer to get me out on the dance floor, as my wife would say. But it don't take too much whiskey.
It gets you there quicker.
Yeah. So Leiper's Fork, for our listeners, are coming down here and stuff, there's not a whole lot of signs on the interstate for you guys.
No, there's not. No. Really, we're Leiper's Fork until, we stake our claim in the ground being Leiper's Fork. It's been its own entity going back to 1801, but it's really kind of an extension of Franklin. So if I'm out and about, somewhere else in the country and they ask where we're from, first answer is Nashville, but then we say really Franklin, that kind
of. And how
far
are we from Nashville right here as the crow flies?
We're about, depending on what time of day, but you can get from downtown Nashville to here in about 35 minutes, somewhere 40 minutes. Yeah.
And then Leiper's Fork. So April used to work for Leiper's Fork, right?
I did.
And they got a pretty famous little grocery store here.
They've got Puckett's here. Mm-hmm.
What's Puckett's for our listeners?
But Puckett's for our listeners is it is not a grocery store. It's kind of a bar grill, eatery. Great place to be. They have a lot of music there, but it started out as a grocery store. A very small grocery store. Actually, when it started out, Miss Mary, who owned it, was making, and how it became into a partial eatery, is she was making hamburgers and fried bologna sandwiches on a flat top.
There's nothing wrong with that right there.
They were great. No, nothing wrong with it.
And they specialize in live music now. They've got live music every night except Monday.
Imagine that. We're in Tennessee now.
I hear you, man.
Like tonight is actually the open mic night.
Yeah, they have an
open mic night.
Are you going to go up there and sing, April?
No.
She could.
I could.
What about Forrest over there? Is he?
No, I'm not going to run up there. I got to run back down.
Forrest over here is a really good singer.
Yeah, you don't want to hear me sing.
So, is there a plan to put some signs up on the interstate and say, "Hey, here's this craft distillery"?
Yeah, right now the story of of our distillery is we will. The short answer is yes. And we've been talking to the state about that. And we do have some signage closer into Franklin. The only marketing we do right now is on social media. You know, we're very internally focused. We're a small distillery. We make 500 barrels a year. It's about 25,000 gallons. Our big brother down the road making 125,000 gallons a day.
So for all of our listeners, this is definitely not an industrial process. And how many barrels per day, you said?
We're making about 2.5 per day.
2.5 per day. And
right.
You know, your buddies up there in Kentucky, Pat and Shane, I think this past summer, and I'm sure they're surpassed that, but they were pushing out about 212 barrels per day.
They got it going on.
You're the true American dream, you know, and you did it right. And I'm sure it wasn't easy to get to this point.
No, and we're not there yet. You know, I mean, right now we've got a lot of, well, when I say a lot of, we think it's a lot of whiskey laying on wood right now. So
liquid assets.
Yeah. I'm whiskey rich and cash poor right now. So, but yeah, so we're getting there. You know, this year we saw close to 17,000 paid tours, which helps us tread water while we're aging whiskey. You know, we're internally focused right now. When we start releasing whiskey, in what we consider bulk, you know, our focus will shift externally. I'll probably have Matt on the road, you know, doing some brand ambassador stuff. And we want to be a small regional brand that will always be allocated. You know, if I do grow, you know, we run a 500 gallon pot still. I love pot stills, the tradition, you know, until column stills were initially invented for the gin market in London in the late 1800s. So up until then, every drop of whiskey made on a pot still. So I love the tradition and the history behind pot stills. I think the flavor is more robust coming off of them. Of course, hey man, everybody's making great whiskey. Yeah. I love to gravitate towards pot still. So if we do anything different, you know, I'll drop in a 1,000 gallon pot still and double our production. If we move off site to a larger area or production area, I think I'll still have a pot still. You know, that's kind of one of the beliefs I have with the way we make whiskey.
That's what I try to tell our listeners, that, you know, get off the beaten trail. Don't go to the big distilleries, you know,
absolutely
go to those big distilleries. But if you want to put your money somewhere, put it in Leiper's Fork at a craft distillery where it's actually going to go to some people. It's going back into Leiper's Fork, into a community that, you know, what else is here? It's not an industrial complex.
Sure. Well, you know, America's built by small business people at its heart. And on the inverse of that, you know, what we're trying to do here is, at its core, is emulate big boy whiskey. I mean, like, I say what we do here to our folks is, you know, we're trying to make a big boy style bourbon Tennessee whiskey at the small level, using our local resources, you know, using traditional techniques. So they are our benchmark. And even in our Tennessee Distillers Guild, you know, Jack and George sit on there, and they're the most uncorporate corporate entities that I know of.
Help you out
too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, they offer lab services. You know, y'all use the term "rising tide floats all ships." You know, that's what we see at our guild meetings. And, you know, like, we sit next to Nicole Austin from George Dickel, Jeff Arnett at Jack, and, you know, they extend the hand to the little guys, and really kind of they're proponents of us. So that's good.
What states are you guys in right now besides Tennessee?
So we're only in pretty much Davidson and Williamson County, which is central middle Tennessee.
Alabama.
Oh yeah, we're down in Alabama.
On the coast.
Yeah, my mom's side of the family is from this area since about 1805, but my dad's side of the family is from the Gulf Coast. So
dirty South down there.
Absolutely, deep South. You know, it's too much iron in the water back in the day to make whiskey down there. But anyway, so we've got a little whiskey down on the Gulf Coast right now. But
there's no plans to make some put apple peels in your whiskey.
You know, not right now. But I'm up to trying anything.
That's an Alabama thing, right?
Is it really?
Clyde Mays.
Yeah, Clyde Mays.
Yeah, he does
that's right.
do that.
He does do that. Yeah.
I just think it's amazing. So are we going to see you in Kentucky to where
absolutely. Yeah. Kentucky is kind of the 65 corridor for sure. You know,
if he doesn't take it to Kentucky, I'm going to have a heart attack or something. I don't know.
April's right. I mean, our next extension will be all of our surrounding states. So kind of right now we've only released 13 barrels of our own whiskey. Starting in November, we'll release another 16 barrels of our own rye whiskey in March. in November of this year, we'll release about 60 barrels of Tennessee whiskey, which we're going to try next. And then I'm trying to put at least 5, that Tennessee will be over 4 years old. So I'm trying to put at least 5 years on my bourbon, which is a wheater. Going back to that, needs a little more time in the barrel. So
I'm trying to get you to pour some of that barrel for me.
So
Matt might have promised a little bit of that.
You never know.
So we can make that happen.
The whiskey you got for me next, your Tennessee whiskey.
Yes.
And I'm looking at that bottle, and it is, I'd say it's almost as double in the color.
It is.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, man, I tell you that
Rich
that
amber.
amber goodness, as I call it, liquid gold.
It is nice. It's a richer color, it's and just for clarity, that's actually Matt and I pulling some samples out with Greg yesterday out of barrels and sitting around, wanted to show you. And also to clarify, you're the first person out of this organization to try that Tennessee whiskey.
Well, that's pretty special.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
I say cheers.
Cheers.
Let's try this.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Now, to me, that's definitely a Tennessee whiskey right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And the grain bill on that 70% corn, 15 rye, 15 malted barley.
When they say smooth is Tennessee whiskey, that's, and some people in the whiskey business, they don't like that word. I think Irish and Scott, they don't like to say smooth whiskey, but I'm 6'3" and I'll say smooth if I want to say smooth.
You can say anything you want.
And that's barrel proof too. That's 105.2
Really?
on that one. So
I think it drinks like a 90 proof. It's, maybe I could see it going and staying in the barrel a little bit long.
Oh, absolutely.
Legs a little light on there, but
yeah.
I think you're definitely on the right track to where that's what I think of a Tennessee whiskey. That's definitely a Tennessee whiskey, and I think you can compete with the big boys with that stuff right there.
Well, thank you. It's I'm happy where it's at right now. The 60 barrels of that we made in year one will start. All of that will be over 4 years old, starting the fall of this year. So eventually, I want our standard bottlings to be about 7 years old. Of course, as a new distillery, you've got to fill that pipeline. So, we're holding stock back as we're releasing. We're keeping that in mind. But it's a struggle, with cash flow. I mean, you walk a balance between. Nobody ever wants to fast forward time, But in the case of whiskey, it's like, man, I wish that was 7 years old, but you can't think like that.
Well, that rick house that you want to build, it doesn't build itself, right? And somebody's got to fund it.
Yep.
Somebody's got to build it.
Yeah.
I think everybody realizes that. And I've heard people say, "Oh, I'm not going to pay $50 or $60 for that bottle of whiskey because." It's not worth that. I can go buy this or this or this. And I'm like, you don't know what they have in that bottle of whiskey. And it's not just a liquid in there. It's their distillery. It's their employees.
Yeah.
It's the love they put into it. They might be hand labeling, like you said. They might be putting the bottles, they're filling the barrels themselves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work that goes into that.
No doubt.
And I think you got to realize that what you're buying is not just the whiskey, but you're buying that company. You're buying their love and their passion for their product.
Sure.
And sometimes I think people will be shocked.
Yeah.
That what they can truly get out of this will compete against anything a big company will put out. I'm not saying don't go buy your standard Jack Daniel's bottle.
Right.
But I think old George and Jack would be proud of you today.
Well, thank you.
With something like this right here.
Yeah. And, I told you before the show, spent a lot of time in Kentucky, and I'm a bourbon guy. I love Tennessee whiskey too. When I started the project, we weren't going to do a Tennessee whiskey. It was going to do Tennessee bourbon. And some friends in Kentucky said, man, you've got to do a Tennessee whiskey. You'd be doing yourself a disservice. I'm a contrarian. I wasn't going to do it. Not a lot of people making bourbon here right now. And I love the tradition behind Tennessee whiskey. Love the tradition behind bourbon and both of them. And the federal government doesn't make a distinction between the two. In essence, Tennessee whiskey is bourbon. That's been an argument going back forever.
By law.
Right? Exactly. I mean, you make the federal government says y'all going to have that argument down south. We don't care. It's bourbon.
But Tennessee made that law themselves, saying it'd be called Tennessee whiskey.
And really what that is you make bourbon in the state of Tennessee, and before it goes into a barrel, you run it through sugar maple charcoal. That is the difference. Sugar maple charcoal.
And it gives that mellower flavor to it.
You can kind of think of it as a Brita filter for whiskey a little bit. Those fusel oils that are carrying over in the distillate. That charcoal is capturing some of those heavier oils, smoothing that whiskey out. What the bourbon people say you're doing is stripping out a little flavor. And there's probably truth to both of those statements. Tennessee whiskey tends to be a little lighter, a little smoother because of that filtration. Maybe have a different mouth feel. I heard Michael Veach on one of your podcasts talk about adds a little alkalinity for sure. We really spend some time testing that whiskey before it goes through that linking, before it goes through it, and then after the after effect.
So before it went through the process, through the filtering process, did you guys taste that?
Yeah.
And look at the color in it. Was it lighter in color or darker in color?
Well, the color is always going to be clear, so because coming off that still, it's white dog. So we actually, there's two schools of thought. You take your white dog off the still, run it through at exit proof off the still, and then do your proofing on the back end. We're actually playing with two techniques right now. We're proofing to about we go in the barrel 110 for various reasons. So we proof that whiskey down about 112 and then run it through the filter, and then that's a little bit of proofing water before we put in the barrel. But we're playing with both of those, and there's different techniques with the Lincoln County process. And so we're kind of playing with those as well. But we go through about 3.5. We don't do as much Jack. We just go through about 3.5 feet of charcoal. Takes us about 36 hours. But yeah.
So Matt and April, every day, how much? Let's say, how much bourbon are you sampling it on a daily basis? Or
Not
whiskey?
enough.
Not enough.
I can agree with that answer. Right?
Well, I mean, we're just now coming into our own, really, with releasing some of these, and I have to I feel like I have to straddle the fence because in my job role here, I do part of operations, I do part of marketing, I help our CFO with that that part of it. So I'm like, no, tap it, don't tap it, tap it. So it's kind of a push and pull.
That's a tricky mindset, whether to let's empty that barrel or not empty it. And I remember Pat and Shane up in there in Kentucky, they were like, well, they were going to wait another year.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think David, I don't remember if it was David or not, that said, hey, you need to bottle this. Let's get this out there. It's ready. It is ready.
It's a line.
And that's a scary, I think that for a business owner, it'd probably be a scary thing to wait or not wait. Does it taste right now? Is it going to taste right in a year?
You only get one chance to make a first impression, and that's scary. My CFO is my uncle, where we're all family owned here, small family owned business. And so
they always say don't do business with family.
We haven't killed each other yet, but it's a trade off. He's a widget guy, so he wants some cash flow, and I want a damn good whiskey. So, we debated on whether to operate for about 4.5, 5 years with no sign on the door, no tourism, just behind the scenes making whiskey. And we decided that, there's obviously value in branding. So for the last 3.5, 4 years, we've been kind of building our brand our way, so to speak. But even now, it's scary for me to release that 3.5-year-old rye. But I do think educated consumers see through youth, and I'm extremely happy with the way everything is progressing. Like I said, I don't want to fast forward time, but I can see where that's going. And for us, we're laughing like April talking about tapping barrels. A lot of big distilleries, they don't start shaking barrels till about year 3. And by year 3, they kind of know which direction it's going. We started tapping barrels. When I say trying them,
sure,
not dumping them, but we were trying after 3 months.
You're pulling for our listeners, that's pulling a bung out, and you're putting a whiskey thief down in there, and taking a sample and letting a couple people try it and seeing what their thoughts are. Because if you just went off of one guy, sure, your taste is different than everybody else's. Me and Jim always say your whiskey your way.
Right.
Your taste is different than my taste.
Sure.
And that's why sometimes I might taste a hot Twizzler.
Right.
Somebody else might taste something different.
And I trust these guys' palates. We do a lot of blind taste tests here. I love blinds. I think they're great. They strip all the the bull crap away. So we do a lot of things here with our products and other folks, and just trying to educate ourselves on the industry from a consumer standpoint. And these guys I'd put their palates up against anybody. Yeah.
Now, Matt, are you excited about being a whiskey ambassador outside of the state of Tennessee?
I'm very excited about it. I got to spend a little time working for actually our distributor. So before I came over working here, I worked for Athens Distributing, and then went over to a local vineyard, and then made my way in this direction. So I'm excited to jump outside of Tennessee and to see this brand grow. I trust Lee. I trust April. I love what they're doing. To me, it's not about how many people come through that door. It's about leaving here as friends and family, but also growing that family outside of Tennessee. And, that's one thing that we're really trying to build this brand around, is that, we are friends and family, and it's friends and family that do this. And so we want to grow that outside of what we're just doing here in Leiper's Fork, and then into Franklin and Nashville and even further. So
yeah, I think you'd see whiskey drinkers open arms to anybody is going to put some whiskey out there in front of them and say, hey, try this good stuff right here.
Sure.
Fine, folks. Let's try my whiskey. And I think that's good. So we got a couple minutes left. In the future, what are you putting out? Are you going to do any finished whiskeys?
So, right now, yes, the short answer is yeah, I'd like to do that. Play around with finishes. That for us, I think, is probably, man, we got some time to do that. We're with that goal of having my standard age statement about 7 years. We've got a while before we do that. So right now I'm concentrating on, the whiskey that we're laying down right now, making it the best we can. We're kind of scratching that itch with alternative type stuff. We're keeping ourselves engaged by doing that, experimental whiskeys once a year. But man, I love what's going on with the finishes on whiskeys. Charlie and Andy up at Nelson, you're going to see them tomorrow, and they're doing some great things with barrel finishing. And so I think that's a big future of the industry. Consumers' palates are getting more complex, and they're wanting to see new things within the boundaries of bourbon and Tennessee whiskey. So, man, the sky's the limit on what you can do with finishing. And so, yeah, short answer is we'd love to do stuff like that down the road, but we got some things to do first.
So, tell me where we can find you guys on social media at.
Yeah, so you'll find us at LF Distillery. So that'll be Instagram, Facebook, leipersforkdistillery.com. That's LEIPERSFORK distillery.com. So that's our website. If you're coming into Nashville, want to book a tour, best way to do it is through that website, and check us out on our Instagram and our Facebook as well.
So if you're headed from Kentucky and you're headed down to the dirty South, the Gulf Coast down there, this is right on their stop, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We're only about 15 minutes off the interstate.
You're looking to grab some lunch, go to Puckett's, get some lunch, come over here, grab a couple bottle of whiskey so you can enjoy them on the beach. And, I'd say you guys you're kicking on all cylinders.
Well, thank you.
And they drink very well on the beach, may I add.
There's nothing wrong with that. Well, Lee, April, Matt, I really appreciate you guys letting the Bourbon Road come on down here to Tennessee. Us Kentucky boys, or myself, a Texas boy, coming down here and drinking some Tennessee whiskey, drinking some rye. We always appreciate when people open their doors to us, and we try to make the most of it. So I thank you.
Hey, we're honored to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Here.
So once again, this is the Bourbon Road. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, on Facebook, The Bourbon Road. You can find us, our webpage is thebourbonroad.com. You can find me on Instagram at One Big Chief. Leave us comments. If you like podcasts like this, episodes with craft distilleries or distilleries or just anybody about the bourbon culture, leave us a 5-star review. Tell us what you think. Send us an email. Let us know. And we'll see you down the Bourbon Road.
We do appreciate all of our listeners, and we'd like to thank you for taking time out of your day to hang out with us here on the Bourbon Road. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and if so, we would appreciate if you'd subscribe and rate us a 5-star with a review on iTunes. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Bourbon Road. That way you'll be kept in the loop on all the Bourbon Road happenings. You You can also visit our website at thebourbonroad.com to read our blog, listen to the show, or reach out to us directly. We always welcome comments or suggestions, and if you have an idea for a particular guest or topic, be sure to let us know. And again, thanks for hanging out with us.